Hello, welcome. My name is Vikram Chandra and you're watching This World, a show that brings you a roundup of the week's biggest developments. And I'm going to start by talking a little bit about China and its relations with Europe. Their CEO meeting has been on in India, and a lot of attention has been fixed on how China is dealing with India and how India is dealing with China and their dynamics. But China has also found itself this week in the middle of a spat with some European countries. And that's partly because of the way China approaches international relations. China, of course, a country with a reputation of fixating on history, as well as interfering with historic realities. But this story begins with a Chinese diplomat telling the world that Ukraine is not a legitimate country. I mean, not in as many words, but his message seemed crystal clear. Louis She, the Chinese ambassador to France, said that post-Soviet nations, quote, do not have an effective status in international law, unquote. We're going to be telling you on this show what happened next, and it wasn't always pretty. Also on this program, it's Donald Trump versus Joe Biden once again as the former and the sitting president of the United States start preparing for the 2024 presidential elections. That's going to be an interesting battle if it comes up. Also, I'm going to be telling you once again that AI is here to change the world, and potentially the music industry could have changed forever just this week. What if I was to tell you that artificial intelligence is now potentially allowing anyone to sing like Rihanna, like Beyonce, or The Weeknd? All you need to do is to tell AI which singer you want to sound like, and the rest could be fascinating and scary, depending on your point of view. We're going to be talking about this in great detail in just a little while. But let's begin with China, Europe, and let's begin with that controversial comment. Post-Soviet countries do not have an effective status in international law. These are the words of Liu She. He's China's ambassador to France. What made him say what he did? Well, Liu was giving a television interview. He was asked if he considers Crimea to be a part of Ukraine. The peninsula, remember, was annexed by Russia in 2014. But Liu did not talk about this annexation. Instead, he said that the ex-Soviet states are not sovereign, or at least that's what he implied. Liu was talking about these countries: Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Estonia, Georgia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Latvia, Lithuania, Moldova, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Ukraine, Uzbekistan. There are a total of 15 countries, including Ukraine's, whose status has essentially been called into by that statement. In essence, the Chinese ambassador to France questioned their sovereignty, their integrity, and their borders. How did Europe react to this? Well, several countries issued summons to Chinese envoys. Liu himself was summoned by France. 80 European parliamentarians wrote an open letter urging France to expel the ambassador. But that's about it. Nothing more happened. Could the response have been stronger? Could the ambassador have been actually expelled? Could China have been officially forced to make a clarification or a statement? Perhaps all of that would have happened if it wasn't for Europe's over-reliance on China, be it for trade, be it for solving the crisis in Ukraine. According to one estimate, China accounts for 20% of EU's good imports and 9% of its goods exports. Many feel that those trade relations give China leverage. Many feel that it is because of those trade relations that Europe cannot or does not take the stance against China, or the stance in response to China, as many people feel that perhaps it should. Now, let's turn to the war between Russia and Ukraine. Not too long ago, the French President Emmanuel Macron traveled to China. He was accompanied by the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, also accompanied by the German Foreign Minister. Now, these leaders met the Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing. What did they discuss? They did discuss the Ukraine war. You see, Europe is leaning on China to establish a framework for negotiation between Russia and Ukraine. It's banking on Xi's friendship with the Russian President Vladimir Putin for bringing an end to the war, a war which has already stretched on for a year and 2 months. So in a situation like this, you could argue that Europe needs China even more. So can Europe really afford to react strongly to some erratic words of someone who's going to be just described as a wolf warrior diplomat? Now, of course, there were some strong statements that did emerge. Here's what Borrell said. The Foreign Affairs Council will start discussing about China in order to prepare the European Council in June, Borrell told reporters before the start of the summit. Maybe that will reassess and recalibrate our strategy towards China. Now, it has to be noted that China has been quick to jump into damage control mode. Let me read out what China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning told the media. China respects the sovereign status of former Soviet republics after the Soviet Union's dissolution, unquote. So, in essence, reversing what had been stated just a short while earlier. Mao also went on to add that this is China's official position. The Chinese embassy in Paris issued a separate statement. It said the ambassador's remarks were, quote, not a statement of politics, but an expression of personal views during a televised debate. So again, some sort of an effort to step back from that. And also, earlier this week, when Xi got on a phone call with Ukraine's President Zelensky, China offered to mediate. Xi told Zelensky that talks are the only way out of the war. China is now sending diplomats to Ukraine. Their task to broker a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia. What does all of this boil down to? China is wasting no time to show that it is serious about playing the peacemaker in Ukraine, but there are some experts who believe that the statement made by the ambassador was too dangerous to undo. So where does the story go from here? Will it impact China's relations with the European Union, or is this going to be a storm in a teacup? So to understand what exactly is happening between China and Europe, who better to talk to than Adrian Gauffin, who's the author of Xi Jinping's biography. It's called Xi Jinping, the most powerful man in the world. And Adrian now joins us on this program. Adrian, thanks so much for joining us. Now, great to have you. You're sitting there in Germany looking at the relationship between Europe and China. How is it looking? It's been looking like a bit of a love-hate relationship for a while. Is that still the way you think it's going to go forward, a love-hate relationship?
Yes, it is. You describe it very well, because I mean, what China under the leadership of Xi Jinping is trying now to make a split between Europe and the United States, because the relation between US and China is worsening every day. And Europe became a strong ally of the United States in the Ukraine war. But now, with some things like Xi Jinping talking to Zelensky, the president of the Ukraine, and so on, with such things, China tries to make a split between US and Europe.
Okay, Adrian, a lot of attention being paid to the remarks made by the Chinese envoy Liu Xie recently, where he's talking about the USSR and the nature of the former republics and whether they really have sovereignty. Now, China's tried to walk that back. But Chinese diplomats don't usually say things that are completely off the cuff. So what do you think are the implications of that statement?
We have seen the true face, the real opinion of the Chinese leadership. Of course, they had to step back now officially, because it's also a problem for their relations to many countries, for example, to Kazakhstan, which is an important neighbor of China, and which is also a former Soviet republic. But I mean, as you said, he's the ambassador. It's not his private opinion. It's obviously the opinion which is shared by many in the Chinese leadership. And this is a very bad sign, because if we start to question the borders in Europe or the borders all over the world, that can be very dangerous.
Okay, Adrian, thanks so much for joining us. We're all going to be keeping a very close eye on China, and I'm sure Europe will as well. Thank you for being with us. All right, let's move from Europe now to the United States. The country's just a year away, or a little more than a year, from presidential elections. Who's running? Well, we know for a fact that the US President Joe Biden he's seeking a second term. Biden has officially announced his candidacy for 2024. The 80-year-old filed documents on Tuesday, and soon his new campaign team released this video.
When I ran for president 4 years ago, I said we're in a battle for the soul of America, and we still are. The question we're facing is whether in the years ahead we have more freedom or less freedom, more rights or fewer. I know what I want the answer to be, and I think you do too. This is not a time to be complacent. That's why I'm running for re-election.
And this was followed by a public appearance.
It's time to finish the job. Finish the job. But also,
And no prizes for guessing which leader was among the first to react. Yes, Donald Trump, former president and Biden's predecessor.
You could take the 5 worst presidents in American history and put them together, and they would not have done the damage Joe Biden has done to our nation in just a few short years. Not even close.
So are you surprised? It's Biden versus Trump once again, or at least that's what it looks like as of now. The Republicans have not yet officially named their presidential candidate, and we don't know who's going to get the party ticket. We do know that former U.S. ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, is in the running for the Republican nomination. So is Indian origin Vivek Ramaswamy, 72-year-old Asa Hutchinson. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, too, is expected to announce his run. But like I was saying, as things stand right now, Trump appears to be the strongest Republican face, making it potentially yet another Trump versus Biden face-off. Now, we know who won last time. So will this time be any different? What Biden has gained in the last 2+ years is a stint at the White House and a track record that you could debate about a little bit. Now, his campaign talks about finishing the job. But so far, has Biden done a great job as president or not? Well, that depends on whom you ask. Some may point at the hasty pullout of Afghanistan, seems to have been a bit of a disaster, or the failure to prevent a war in Europe, or the inflation at home. But the others who would celebrate Biden for record job growth, the kind which has not been seen since 1960s, or returning the United States to the Paris Climate Accord. What about Trump? What is he campaigning on? Make America Great Again. That slogan has been Trump's favorite since his 2016 presidential campaign. But the Capitol riots that Trump in so many ways instigated following his loss in the last elections urged many to ask whether Trump really had America's best interest in mind, whether he really is in the race to make America great again. As for Biden, the age factor looms large. He would be 86 by the end of his second term. That is, of course, if he manages to secure it. Also, Biden's approval rating is just 39%. Trump, by the way, is not going to be a spring chicken either by the time he finishes. He's younger than Biden, but not by all that much. So as you can see, Americans aren't exactly spoiled for choice at this point. It all comes down to the question, who is likely to win a Trump versus Biden battle? And to figure out what exactly is going to happen next, it's a great pleasure to be joined by Kimberly Leonard. She's a policy and politics correspondent with Insider. Kimberly, thanks so much. You're there in Florida just to join us. So I'm sure Ron DeSantis is keeping a very close eye on all of this. What's it looking like to you? Is it going to be Trump versus Biden, or is someone else going to step in?
I think what we've seen in recent weeks is that Trump has really benefited from the indictment and benefited from the fact that he seems to get more support when other Republicans attack him. So we saw Florida Governor Ron DeSantis go after him, sort of dig against him because he, lost the 2020 election, and dig against him because of the allegations that are in the indictment. But Trump then saw soaring in the polls, and then we saw DeSantis losing in the polls. So there's sort of this contrast that happens that every Republican seems to struggle with, which is, how do you take down Trump? Because it seems like the more he's under attack, the more support he gets.
But let's just look at both the camps. On the Republican side, it's still not a done deal for Trump by any stretch of the imagination. Ron DeSantis has been faring reasonably well. Jury is still out as to who's going to get the candidacy.
Definitely. And I think one thing that probably is heartening to the DeSantis camp is that he has taken a lot of punches from Trump in recent weeks, and he is still in the game. And if you look at Ron DeSantis against, let's say, Nikki Haley or Mike Pence, who will probably announce, or, Vivek Ramaswamy, you still see that DeSantis is the one who comes anywhere close to potentially being second place to Trump.
All right, turning to the Democratic side, when it comes to Biden, do you think, is it a done deal out there? I know there are some people who feel that, well, it's possible that Biden will get the candidacy, but maybe if there was another candidate, they would have a better shot, a more sure-shot chance of beating Trump. Remember, it was actually quite close between Biden and Trump even in 2020.
One of the benefits Biden has that Trump doesn't have is that even though you see a majority of voters do not want Biden to run again, that's what polling show, you don't have prominent Democrats jumping in to challenge him. That's in contrast to Trump. I mean, Trump is still also, someone that a lot of voters don't want to run. But you have all these Republicans who are jumping in to challenge him, even potentially his former vice president.
I have to say, I'm really curious about the age factor. Whether if it's Biden versus Trump, it's going to be what, 80s versus late 70s, a couple of years here and there. Now, if you compare that, for example, to the age that Clinton was when he became the president, or Obama was when he became the president, or even George Bush, these are relatively, really old candidates. So what's happening? Is the era of ancient Americans running the country back, or are we going to see young candidates out there at some point?
Well, it's definitely a factor that voters are thinking about. We see that in polling. It's one of the biggest factors that people say Biden shouldn't run again. And I hear a lot of questions from voters, even Democratic ones, about, whether Biden is up to the job. And when he ran in 2020, he benefited from the COVID pandemic because he was able to run a virtual campaign. And what was interesting was that if you were there during the primary, which I was kind of following him around, a lot of reporters were questioning whether he could, become the nominee. They really thought it was a done deal that he could not, because, he would be extremely late to campaign events. He would stumble through questions. There would be small groups of people. His age was showing.
Kimberly Leonard, we're going to keep coming back to you for this really fascinating story that's going to build an America all the way through till the 2024 elections. Thanks for being with us.